I sat in the stuffy office of Harrison and Associates, fidgeting with the brim of my worn cowboy hat, while the lawyer shuffled through papers that would determine the fate of Grandpa Joe's legacy. The mahogany conference table seemed too formal for decisions about a man who'd spent his life working the land with calloused hands and a heart bigger than the Montana sky. Around the table sat my adoptive family, people I'd called brother and sister for 15 years, but who had never quite let me forget that my blood didn't match theirs. My brother Marcus leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. At 26, he was 4 years older than me, and had always carried himself like the rightful heir to everything Grandpa Joe had built. My sister Sarah sat beside him, her perfectly manicured hands folded neatly, already calculating how the inheritance would affect her plans to sell the ranch and move to the city. When Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading, the room fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock that seemed to count down the seconds until everything changed. Grandpa Joe had left the house to Marcus, the land to Sarah, and various financial assets distributed among other relatives. I listened to each bequest with growing resignation, assuming I'd been remembered with some token gesture, maybe his old truck or his collection of Western novels. Then, Mr. Harrison spoke the words that would fracture our family forever. To my grandson, Jake Morrison, I leave my most treasured possession, Thunder, my quarter horse, along with all his tack, feed supplies, and $50,000 for his care and training. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus shot upright in his chair, his face flushing red with anger. Sarah's mouth fell open in undisguised shock. But what hurt most was seeing the confusion and resentment in their eyes as they looked at me, not as their brother, but as an intruder who had somehow stolen what should have been theirs. Chapter 2. The Confrontation. The drive back to the ranch was tense, with Marcus gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her silence more ominous than any words could have been. I rode in the back of his pickup truck, watching the familiar landscape roll by and trying to process what had just happened. Grandpa Joe had left me Thunder, not just any horse, but the magnificent quarter horse he'd trained from a colt and rode almost every day for the past 12 years. When we pulled into the circular drive in front of the ranch house, Marcus slammed the truck door with enough force to rattle the windows. The confrontation I'd been dreading began immediately, right there on the gravel driveway, where Grandpa Joe had taught me to change a tire when I was 14. "This is bullshit, Jake, and you know it," Marcus spat, his face twisted with an anger I'd rarely seen directed at me so intensely. "Thunder is worth more than everything else he left combined. That horse has championship bloodlines, and Grandpa spent years training him for barrel racing." Sarah nodded her agreement, her voice cold and calculating. "It makes no sense. Why would he leave his most valuable asset to—" She paused, searching for the right words, but Marcus finished the thought with brutal honesty. "To someone who's not even real family." The words hit me like a physical blow. 15 years of shared Christmas mornings, family dinners, and working side by side on this ranch, and my brother still saw me as an outsider. I'd been 7 years old when Joe and Martha Morrison adopted me from the foster system after my parents died in a car accident. They'd never made me feel like anything less than their grandchild, but apparently their biological children had different feelings about my place in the family. "Grandpa Joe made his choice," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt churning in my chest. "Maybe you should ask yourself why he made it." Marcus stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "Don't you dare lecture me about what Grandpa wanted. You manipulated an old man's emotions, and now you're trying to cash in on his sentiment." Chapter 3. Thunder's Story. That evening, while Marcus and Sarah huddled in the house planning their next move, I walked out to the pasture where Thunder grazed in the fading daylight. The horse lifted his head when he saw me approaching, his dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that had always seemed almost human. Thunder was a beautiful animal, a deep bay quarter horse with perfect conformation and a white star on his forehead that Grandpa Joe claimed looked like a lightning bolt. I'd watched Grandpa Joe work with Thunder since the horse was a yearling, teaching him not just basic obedience, but the subtle partnership that made them one of the most successful barrel racing teams in the county. Thunder wasn't just fast, he was intuitive. able to read his rider's intentions and anticipate the turns around the barrels with split-second precision. In the right hands, he could have been worth 6 figures or more. But Thunder meant more to Grandpa Joe than money or prizes. The horse had been born on the ranch during a thunderstorm so fierce that the vet couldn't make it through the flooding roads. Grandpa Joe had delivered the foal himself in the barn, working by lantern light while lightning illuminated the Montana sky. That little colt came into the world fighting, he'd told me countless times. Just like you did, Jake. As I stood in the pasture remembering those words, Thunder approached and nuzzled my shoulder with the familiarity of long friendship. Grandpa Joe had started teaching me to ride on Thunder when I was 12, patient with my inexperience and generous with his encouragement. "A horse knows your heart," he'd said. "Thunder likes you because you've got good intentions and gentle hands." Now I understood why Grandpa Joe had left Thunder to me. It wasn't about the horse's monetary value or even his championship potential. Thunder represented everything Grandpa Joe had tried to teach me about patience, dedication, and the kind of love that sees potential where others see only problems. He'd left me Thunder because he knew I would love the horse the way he had, not as property, but as family. Chapter 4. The Legal Challenge. Within a week of the will reading, Marcus had hired his own lawyer and filed papers challenging Grandpa Joe's final wishes. The legal grounds were flimsy, claiming that Grandpa Joe hadn't been of sound mind when he wrote the will, despite abundant evidence to the contrary. But Marcus was determined to prove that I had somehow manipulated the situation to my benefit. The accusations stung worse than I'd expected. Marcus told anyone who would listen that I had spent my teenage years working on Grandpa Joe's emotions, playing up my tragic orphan background to secure a bigger inheritance. According to him, I was a master manipulator who had convinced an old man to overlook his real family in favor of someone who didn't belong. Sarah supported Marcus's version of events, though her motivations seemed more financial than emotional. She'd already been in contact with real estate developers about selling the ranch, and Thunder's unexpected disposition to me complicated her plans. If I decided to keep the horse on the property, it would affect the land's development potential and reduce her profits. The stress of the legal battle took its toll on all of us, but I felt it most acutely in my daily interactions with Thunder. The horse sensed my anxiety and became restless, pacing his stall and whinnying whenever I approached. Grandpa Joe had always said that horses were mirrors for human emotions, and Thunder was reflecting my inner turmoil with uncomfortable accuracy. During this time, I found myself spending hours in Grandpa Joe's study, reading through his journals, and trying to understand his thought process when he wrote his will. What I discovered there would change my understanding of my place in the family forever and provide the ammunition I needed to fight Marcus's legal challenge. Chapter 5. The Journals. Grandpa Joe had been a meticulous record keeper, documenting everything from cattle breeding schedules to his thoughts on family dynamics in leather-bound journals he'd maintained for decades. As I read through entries dating back to the year I was adopted, a picture emerged of a man who had watched his biological grandchildren with growing disappointment, while finding unexpected joy in the orphaned boy who had joined their family. The entries about Marcus were particularly illuminating. Grandpa Joe had noted Marcus's increasing obsession with money and status, his impatience with ranch work, and his casual cruelty toward the animals. "Marcus sees the horses as tools," one entry read. "He doesn't understand that they're partners. Today he hit Thunder with a crop for balking at a jump, and I had to intervene. The boy has strength but no wisdom, power but no patience." Sarah fared little better in Grandpa Joe's observations. He documented her frequent complaints about ranch life, her eagerness to leave for college and never return, and her transparent interest in converting the family legacy into cash. "Sarah sees dollar signs when she looks at the land," he'd written. "She doesn't see the generations of Morrison blood and sweat that built this place. She wants to sell our history to developers." But the entries about me told a different story. Grandpa Joe had carefully noted my progress with the horses, my genuine interest in ranching, and my natural ability to connect with animals that others found difficult. "Jake has the gift," one entry stated simply. "He understands that ranching isn't about owning the land, it's about being owned by it. He belongs here in a way that Marcus and Sarah never will." The most powerful entry was dated just 6 months before Grandpa Joe's death. "I've decided to leave Thunder to Jake. Marcus will be angry and Sarah will be confused, But it's the right decision. Jake is the only one who truly loves that horse, and Thunder is the only one who can teach Jake everything he needs to know about being a Morrison. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Chapter 6. Finding My Voice. Armed with Grandpa Joe's journals and a new understanding of his intentions, I decided to fight back against Marcus's legal challenge. But more importantly, I decided to stop accepting the role of grateful outsider that my adoptive siblings had assigned me. For too many years I'd apologized for my existence and downplayed my contributions to the family and ranch, afraid that asserting myself would confirm their suspicions that I didn't belong. The transformation began with how I handled Thunder. Instead of apologizing to Marcus and Sarah for the horse's presence on the ranch, I took full responsibility for his care and training. I moved Thunder to the best pasture, upgraded his stall in the barn, and began working with him every day to maintain the partnership Grandpa Joe had built. Thunder responded to my increased confidence with renewed energy and trust. We spent hours in the ring working on barrel racing patterns, and I could feel him testing me, pushing to see if I had the skill and determination to be worthy of Grandpa Joe's legacy. Some days were frustrating, with Thunder refusing jumps or fighting the bit, but I remembered Grandpa Joe's patience and persevered. When Marcus confronted me about my presumptuous behavior in treating Thunder like my own horse, I stood my ground for the first time in years. "Thunder is my horse," I told him calmly. "Grandpa Joe left him to me, and until a court says otherwise, I'm going to care for him the way Grandpa would have wanted." Marcus's face flushed red with anger. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? This is our family ranch, not your personal playground. Then start acting like family instead of treating me like a trespasser," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. "I've been here 15 years, Marcus. I've worked this land, loved these animals, and earned my place. If you can't see that, the problem isn't with me, it's with you." Chapter 7. The community responds. Word of the family dispute spread through our rural community faster than I'd expected. In small ranch towns, everyone knows everyone else's business, and opinions form quickly about who's right and who's wrong in family conflicts. What surprised me was how many people stepped forward to support my connection to Thunder and defend Grandpa Joe's decision. Old Pete Hensley, who'd been Grandpa Joe's best friend and regular coffee companion at the diner, made a point of stopping by the ranch to check on Thunder and me. Pete had known Grandpa Joe for over 50 years, and his opinion carried weight in the community. "Your grandpa talked about you and that horse all the time," Pete told me as we watched Thunder graze in the pasture. "He used to say you had more natural horsemanship in your little finger than most folks had in their whole body." Joe knew what he was doing when he wrote that will. Similar support came from unexpected sources. Dr. Martinez, the local veterinarian who'd treated Thunder since he was a foal, offered to testify about my knowledge of the horse and my ability to provide proper care. The feed store owner mentioned that I was the one who'd been purchasing Thunder's special supplements for the past 2 years, not Marcus or Sarah. Even Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd taught Sunday school to all the Morrison grandchildren, made her feelings clear during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "That horse belongs with Jake," she declared loudly enough for other shoppers to hear. Joe Morrison was the smartest man I ever knew, and he wouldn't have left Thunder to someone who couldn't handle the responsibility. The community support was overwhelming and humbling. These people had watched me grow up as a Morrison, and they saw me as legitimate family in ways that Marcus and Sarah apparently couldn't. Their backing gave me confidence to continue fighting for what Grandpa Joe had intended, but it also deepened the rift between me and my adoptive siblings. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. The tension between Marcus, Sarah, and me reached a breaking point 3 weeks after the will reading. I'd been working with Thunder in the training ring when Marcus stormed out of the house. His face twisted with rage after receiving another legal bill from his attorney. The case wasn't going well for him, and the stress was making him increasingly volatile. "This stops now, Jake," Marcus shouted as he approached the ring. "You're bankrupting this family with your selfishness. Do you have any idea how much money we're spending on lawyers because of your stubbornness?" I continued working Thunder around the barrels, trying to maintain the calm energy the horse needed for proper training. "I didn't start this legal fight, Marcus. You did." "Because you don't deserve that horse," Marcus exploded. "You've been here 15 years, but you're still not one of us. Grandpa Joe felt sorry for you, and you took advantage of an old man's kindness." Thunder sensed the aggressive energy and began to sidestep nervously. his ears flattened against his head. I dismounted immediately, knowing that continuing to ride in such a charged atmosphere would be dangerous for both of us. That's not how it was, and you know it, I said, leading Thunder toward the gate. Grandpa Joe left me Thunder because he knew I'd love him and care for him properly. Love him? Marcus laughed bitterly. You want to talk about love? I grew up on this ranch. I spent every summer working these fields, learning this business, carrying on the Morrison legacy. What did you do? You showed up here as a charity case and somehow convinced everyone you belonged. Sarah had emerged from the house during the argument and now stood watching with cold calculation. When she finally spoke, her words were careful but devastating. Maybe it's time we all acknowledge the truth, she said quietly. Jake, you've been a good addition to our family, but you're not a Morrison. You never will be. Fighting over this inheritance is tearing us apart. And for what? A horse? Chapter 9. Thunder's Test. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah's words echoed in my head, forcing me to confront questions about identity and belonging that I'd been avoiding for years. Was I really a Morrison? Or just someone who'd been temporarily taken in by a generous family? Did I deserve Thunder? Or was Marcus right that I'd manipulated Grandpa Joe's emotions? I found myself walking out to the barn at 2 a.m, drawn by the need to be near Thunder and think through my situation. The horse was awake in his stall, as if he'd been waiting for me. His dark eyes reflected the moonlight streaming through the barn windows, and he nickered softly when he saw me approach. I opened his stall door and stepped inside, something Grandpa Joe had taught me to do only with horses I trusted completely. Thunder allowed me to lean against his warm flank, and I found comfort in his steady breathing and familiar scent. As I stood there in the darkness, I remembered something Grandpa Joe had told me years earlier. A horse will test you, he'd said. Not with meanness, but with honesty. Thunder will know if you really belong with him or if you're just pretending. Trust him to tell you the truth about yourself. As if he'd heard Grandpa Joe's voice, Thunder turned his head and looked at me directly. In that moment, I felt something pass between us. An understanding, a recognition, a bond that went deeper than ownership or inheritance. Thunder wasn't testing my right to possess him. He was confirming my capacity to be worthy of his trust. I spent the rest of the night in the stall with Thunder, and by morning I had made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't fight Marcus and Sarah anymore, but I also wouldn't abandon what Grandpa Joe had entrusted to me. There was a third option that none of us had considered. Chapter 10. The Proposal. The next morning, I called a family meeting in Grandpa Joe's study. Marcus arrived with his lawyer, clearly expecting me to surrender Thunder and end the legal battle. Sarah brought her real estate agent, assuming I was ready to negotiate some kind of settlement that would clear the way for her development plans. Instead, I presented them with a proposal that surprised everyone. I'm not giving up Thunder, I began, watching Marcus's face darken with anger. But I'm also not trying to tear this family apart over Grandpa Joe's will. So here's what I'm offering. I'll take Thunder and leave the ranch. You can have everything else exactly as you planned. Marcus gets the house, Sarah gets the land to develop, and I disappear from your lives forever. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah's real estate agent looked confused. Marcus's lawyer seemed relieved, but my adoptive siblings wore expressions I couldn't quite read. Where would you go? Sarah asked finally. Pete Hensley has offered me a job managing his horse training operation in Wyoming. It's good work, and Thunder and I could build something together. I'd take the $50,000 Grandpa Joe left for Thunder's care and start fresh somewhere else. Marcus leaned forward, suspicion clear in his voice. What's the catch? This seems too easy. There's no catch, I replied. But there is a condition. I want you both to admit that your objection to Thunder's bequest wasn't about the horse's value or Grandpa Joe's mental state. You were angry because he chose me, the adopted grandchild, over his blood relatives. I want you to be honest about why that hurt you. The request clearly made them uncomfortable, forcing them to examine motivations they'd preferred to keep buried. Marcus shifted in his chair, his lawyer placing a restraining hand on his arm. Sarah stared at her hands, struggling with emotions she rarely displayed. I think, Sarah said slowly, this is about more than just a horse or even money. It's about what Grandpa Joe's choice said about us as his grandchildren and as people. Chapter 11. The Honest Conversation. For the first time since Grandpa Joe's death, Marcus, Sarah, and I had an honest conversation about our family dynamics and the resentments that had been building for years. With my proposal on the table and the pressure of legal battles removed, we could finally address the real issues that had divided us. Marcus went first, his usual bravado replaced by something approaching vulnerability. "You want honesty? Fine. I was angry because Grandpa Joe leaving Thunder to you felt like a judgment on who I am as a person. Thunder was supposed to be mine. I'm the oldest male grandchild, I know horses, and I've worked this ranch my entire life. When Grandpa chose you instead, it felt like he was saying I wasn't good enough." Sarah nodded, recognizing similar feelings in herself. I felt rejected too, but differently. Grandpa Joe knew I wanted to sell the ranch and move to the city. Leaving Thunder to Jake was his way of saying that my dreams weren't worthy of respect. It felt like punishment for not wanting the same life he'd lived. I listened to their admissions with growing understanding. Their anger hadn't really been about my adopted status. It had been about feeling judged and found wanting by someone whose approval they desperately needed. "But here's what I don't understand," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "Why didn't Grandpa Joe talk to us about his disappointment? Why did he wait until he was dead to tell us how he really felt about our choices?" It was a fair question, and one I thought I could answer based on my reading of Grandpa Joe's journals. "Because he loved you both too much to hurt you while he was alive," I said. "Grandpa Joe saw your strengths as clearly as he saw your weaknesses. Marcus, he was proud of your business sense and your determination. Sarah, he respected your intelligence and your independence. But he also knew that neither of you shared his passion for the ranch life." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Leaving Thunder to me wasn't about loving you less. It was about recognizing that I was the only one who would continue what he'd started with that horse. Thunder needed someone who would see him as a partner, not an asset. Chapter 12. The Decision. Our conversation lasted well into the afternoon, with emotions ranging from anger to sadness to something approaching reconciliation. By the time we'd exhausted our grievances and explanations, the sun was setting over the Montana landscape that had shaped all our lives. Marcus was the first to speak after a long period of contemplative silence. "I still think Grandpa Joe should have talked to us directly instead of using his will to send messages," he said. "But I can see why he chose you for Thunder. You do have a connection with that horse that the rest of us don't." Sarah nodded her agreement. "And honestly, Jake, your proposal to leave solves a lot of problems for all of us. You get Thunder and a fresh start. Marcus gets the house without the complications of fighting over horse care, and I can proceed with my development plans." But as I looked around Grandpa Joe's study, surrounded by the books and memories that had shaped my understanding of what it meant to be a Morrison, I realized that leaving wasn't what I really wanted. Running away to Wyoming would solve the immediate conflict, but it wouldn't address the deeper issues about family, belonging, and legacy that had brought us to this point. "I need to tell you something," I said, surprising myself with the decision I was about to announce. "I don't want to leave. This ranch is my home. Thunder belongs here. And despite everything that's happened, you're my family. We need to find a way to make this work without anyone having to sacrifice their dreams." Marcus looked skeptical. "How do you propose we do that? Sarah still wants to sell. I still need a place to live. And you still have a horse that requires significant resources to maintain." I took a deep breath and presented the solution that had been forming in my mind throughout our conversation. We modify Sarah's development plans. Instead of selling the entire ranch to developers, we sell part of the land for residential development and use the proceeds to buy out Sarah's inheritance at fair market value. Marcus gets the house and enough land for a small cattle operation. I get Thunder and enough acreage for a horse training business. Sarah gets her money and her freedom to pursue her own path. Chapter 13. The New Beginning. 6 months after Grandpa Joe's death, the Morrison Ranch looked different, but felt more peaceful than it had in years. Sarah's modified development plan had been approved by the county, and the sale of 200 acres to a company building executive homes had provided enough money to satisfy everyone's inheritance expectations. Marcus had embraced his role as the ranch's new owner, focusing on a small but profitable cattle operation that suited both his business sense and his connection to the land. Without the pressure of maintaining the entire 1,000-acre spread, he'd found satisfaction in doing quality work on a manageable scale. Sarah had used her inheritance money to start a consulting firm in Denver, helping rural communities develop sustainable growth plans. She visited the ranch regularly, and I could see that her relationship with the land was evolving from rejection to respectful appreciation. As for me, I'd started Morrison horse training in the barn that Grandpa Joe had built 40 years earlier. Thunder and I worked with problem horses, young colts, and riders who needed to develop better partnerships with their animals. The business was growing steadily, and I'd been able to hire 2 part-time assistants to help with the increasing workload. Thunder had thrived in his new role as both my personal mount and the lead horse in my training program. His intelligence and responsiveness made him an excellent teacher for other horses, and his success in local barrel racing competitions was attracting clients from across the region. The best part of our new arrangement was that we'd learned to function as a family again, despite our different paths and perspectives. Marcus, Sarah, and I had regular dinners together, and we'd developed a tradition of spending Sundays maintaining Grandpa Joe's grave and sharing stories about his influence on our lives. One evening, as I watched Thunder graze in the pasture where he'd been born, I reflected on everything that had happened since that day in the lawyer's office. Grandpa Joe's will had initially divided us, but ultimately, it had forced us to confront the truth about our relationships and find a way to honor both our individual dreams and our shared legacy. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of Thunder, silhouetted against the sunset, planning to add it to the album I was creating to document our journey together. As I framed the shot, I heard Grandpa Joe's voice in my memory. "Family isn't about blood, Jake. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when everything falls apart." Looking at the ranch we'd all worked to preserve in different ways, I knew he'd been right about family, about Thunder, and about the power of love to overcome even the deepest divisions. Thank you so much for listening to Jake's story about finding his place in a family that questioned his right to belong. Stories like these remind us that family bonds are built through love, respect, and shared experiences rather than just blood relations. We'd love to hear from you. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening to our stories from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of family, legacy, and the courage to fight for what matters most. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul.